Often, however, this slaughter was nothing but a murderous sacrifice by armed men, no better than thugs, really, who had lost their morality. Mormon and Moroni witnessed it all, but doing so in no way jeopardized their standing with the Lord. They were honorable men of valor, devoted in their personal lives and their priesthood ministry to serving the Lord. They did the best they could, but they could not begin to control, much less prevent, the terrible things they witnessed. What is it, one must ask, that enabled these two great soldier prophets to remain spiritually sensitive and purified from the blood and sins of their generation, despite the horrors they experienced? I believe that Mormon provides a profound insight in this passage, found in Alma chapter 62, the 41st verse. But behold, because of the exceedingly great length of the war between the Nephites and the Lamanites, many had become exceedingly hardened because of the exceedingly great length of the war. But many were softened because of their afflictions, insomuch that they did humble themselves before God, even in the depth of humility. Some men were hardened by their experiences on the battlefield. Each of us here has known some of those. But others were actually softened and became spiritually more pliant in such experiences because of their humble submissiveness to the Lord. I read these words etched by Mormon on the sacred record and remember a squad leader, a sergeant in my rifle platoon, a man of Polynesian heritage and a great Latter-day Saint. Both literally and figuratively, he walked through fire in the jungles and rice paddies. Yet he never lost his sweetness. Each evening at dusk, unashamedly, he would kneel beside his foxhole in silent, earnest prayer. Without comment or invitation, his men would silently assemble beside him in those moments, each offering his own supplication to the Almighty. Like Mormon and Moroni, he faced down the work of death with meekness and faith. And so hopefully it has been and will be for you and me, my dear brethren. We too may know the work of death. We may see and live the terrors and horrors of the battlefield. We may see men die, good men and bad men. But through it all, we can and will maintain our integrity as priesthood men. And each of us can take comfort in the sweet assurance that the Lord knows of our service and our devotion to righteous principles. Of Captain Moroni it was said, if all men had been and were and ever would be like unto Moroni, behold, the very powers of hell would have been shaken forever. Yea, the devil would never have power over the hearts of the children of men. My brethren, please take comfort that in your righteousness the Lord feels that way about you. Now a final bit of advice. Do not allow yourselves to get caught up in the politics that swirl around almost every war as you strive to measure the worth of the great sacrifice that you and your loved ones are called upon to make. Do not despair because there are some who question the rightness of the cause in which you are enlisted to fight and for which you may sacrifice so much. Most wars are controversial with their countrymen. That will likely be the case with your war, past, present, or future. America's war in Iraq is instructive in that regard. The word I have heard President Hinckley use with respect to the U.S. decision to invade Iraq is simply this: portentous. Portentous meaning momentous. Who can say what will come from that venture in Iraq as it relates to the work of the Lord? Certainly, we can say that for the first time since ancient times, men holding the priesthood of God have set foot in that land of the Tigris and the Euphrates, the cradle of civilization. What will this eventually mean for the advent of the restored gospel among nations and peoples yet dark to its redeeming message? What will be the result of your war as it relates to the work of the Lord? One thing we can say for sure at this time: the Lord will find a way eventually to turn the course of political events to his purposes. And each of you will one day look back and see that you played a role in mighty and historic events. This is a true principle of life in these latter days for those who are devoted and worthy servants of the Lord. We are swept along in great events that we can neither fully understand nor control. But this we know, the Lord is about doing His work. Of this I bear profound personal testimony. In October 1966, our battalion had been several weeks in the field when I received word somehow that Elder Gordon B. Hinckley of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles was going to pay a visit to LDS servicemen in Vietnam. His last stop was to be at a meeting atop the Caravel Hotel in Saigon. This was the closest location to our base camp. There were 3 of us in our infantry battalion of some 500 men who were Latter-day Saints. I was a senior in rank. So I went to the battalion commander and asked if the 3 of us might be excused from combat duty for 24 hours to enable us to attend this special meeting. To my delight and surprise, he gave his consent. So the 3 of us caught a hop on an ammunition resupply helicopter back to our base camp, where we showered and changed into clean field uniforms. Then we were able to catch another ride on a helicopter headed for Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Saigon. We arrived just as the meeting was about to begin. There were about 200 of us, mostly soldiers, although there were a handful of nurses and Red Cross workers, and most significantly, a few Vietnamese converts. And there, seated before us, was Elder Hinckley. I remember that I almost had to pinch myself. I simply could not believe that an apostle of the Lord had come to that terribly war-torn land. Well, it was a wonderful meeting. I remember that among other speakers, a young Vietnamese woman gave a short talk, one of the very first converts. Finally, Elder Hinckley arose to speak. He gave a powerful and inspirational address, but it is what happened next that I shall never forget. As he concluded his talk, Elder Hinckley told us that before he departed Salt Lake City, he had visited with President David O. McKay. He said that President McKay had authorized him to dedicate the land of South Vietnam to the preaching of the gospel if he felt so inspired. Said Elder Hinckley to us, "I feel so inspired." So as we in khaki and olive drab uniforms, soldiers and priesthood men, bowed our heads, this great apostle offered a magnificently beautiful prayer on that land, dedicating it to the work of the Lord. I wish I had the capacity to give expression to the spirit that settled over that congregation. It was one of the most profound spiritual experiences of my life. There, in the midst of war and bloodshed and all manner of evil on every hand, the Lord of hosts had found a way to turn circumstances to His advantage. In the years that have passed since then, as I have visited among Latter-day Saint congregations of Vietnamese and others from the Southeast Asian Peninsula, in my mind's eye, I have seen that little band of soldiers and an apostle of the Lord. I have recalled that spirit, and I have seen the beginning of the fulfillment of the Lord's promises to the people of that land.